Populating. Welcome to the WeHa.com Roundtable. I'm John Lyons, joined as always by the managing editor of WeHa.com, Ronnie Newton. Tonight, we have four guests from the West Hartford State Delegation. Derek Slatt is the 5th District State Senator for the state of Connecticut. Representing the 18th District is the senior of the three, the senior state representative of the three here tonight is Jillian Gilchrest. Representing the 19th District as state rep is Tammy Exum, and representing the 20th is Kate Farrar. Quick introduction, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks
for having us.
Glad to be here in person.
So we have an election year upon us. So let's start. Kate, how is it going? How are the fundraising efforts going? Is there a lot of excitement and enthusiasm yet, or are we a little early for that? And do you know if you have an opponent running against you?
Well, I love jumping right into it, as all of our heads are in session, quite honestly. But for me personally, it's such a breath of fresh air. As someone who ran extensively during COVID, it's so exciting to actually think about running a campaign when we can gather in person, when we can talk to voters so much more one-on-one. So my campaign, like I know many of my colleagues, launched in January and wonderfully qualified with state public financing, and just looking forward to all the work we're going to do in session so that we can get out indoors in May.
Well, you have yet to see a normal cycle, and Tammy, I always love, we've talked about this on air in the past, how you're on your second full term.
My first full term.
Your first full term, and you have yet to see normalcy because you were elected in a special election, and then about a week later, COVID hit, or
That's right.
maybe a month
Well,
later.
a special
but-
election, and then it was in the throes of the session. So, within an hour of getting there, I was voting, and I did not have the benefit of committees and hearings and all of that. So it was a really kind of crazy time. And then we had maybe 6 weeks, kind of got into the community, went back, and COVID. So it's been, for me, I had the special election at that time, and then when we were in, again, COVID, and the whole next time we were shut down. I mean, we did everything virtually. So I'm looking forward this time to having the opportunity to be in person, door knock, really happy that I know West Hartford to also get into Avon more as a result of being able to, just be around people and meet people in person. But yeah, it's been a really interesting time to serve, to say the least.
And Jillian, you've had a little bit more of a traditional go for it. How is this? Have you hit your fundraising goals?
I have. So I too am fortunate, kicked off in January, reached the goal, and so I'm pretty much waiting because it's session until May. I'm really excited to get back on the doors. My first go round, I hit a ton of doors in town, and last time with COVID wasn't as possible. Still knocked on doors, but not like I did the first time around. So our districts have also shifted a little bit. So I'm interested to get out there and meet those new neighbors.
So you're still strictly West Hartford, but you've got a few new streets.
Yes, correct.
Okay, super. So
The districts don't actually change, though, until the election. Is that right?
That's right.
So for the
Once we're
campaigning, yeah.
for campaigning, we shift to the new districts.
Okay.
But really, after the election and once we're sworn in, we start representing the new districts.
Okay.
it's an interesting process, and it's what people don't realize is this is based on the U.S. Census. And sometimes I think people don't understand how important it is to fill out your census, but here it is, all politics is local, right?
That's
And
right.
we're seeing it impact our districts. In fact, we've picked up 2 new state representatives as a result of the census. And forgive me, Representative Vargas, who's going to handle the Elmwood section of town.
Part of the Elmwood
Not
sector.
the full part.
Yeah.
Okay, part of it. Okay, I guess you've got some of Elmwood.
Well, I would say the
Right,
the majority of Elmwood will remain in the 20th district. It's
Okay.
kind of South Street towards Hartford, a section towards Hartford that will become a part of what is a Hartford seat now. And then, as you noted, there's a small corner in the northern part of West Hartford that it will become conjoined with a Bloomfield seat. And so with both of those changes, it would mean that our state delegation, instead of 3, would be represented by 5.
So I've got to tell the producer to order 2 more chairs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we got a few months to get that done.
benches.
Because government moves slowly, so
It
we've got a
does.
little time to get that, get the chairs ordered. So
But one of the fun things is that, aren't we the only all-female House
We're
delegation?
the first time that West Hartford's had an all-female
Well, good enough.
so
this will-
delegation. Yeah.
until they conspired to change it.
I know.
So
It's
this will
totally changed
this will
on
be a
us.
shift for us.
Yeah,
We've we've enjoyed it.
So I want to get into the issues, but I want to ask an inappropriate question to start. Are you guys having fun? Do you love what you do? Is it fun? It seems like you guys are having a lot of fun working together and doing what you're doing.
Well, I can just say that I am so happy for this delegation. Together we have fun, and together we work really well. I mean, we really have very good energy and synergy. So I'm really appreciative of our delegation, and I would call it fun, chaotic, something that has a lot of structure and rules within which you don't have structures and rules around, like the Zoom piece, which we do now. But everything's happening, it's very dynamic, right? And so you have to adapt and adjust as things change, but there's always a lot of structure around it, and sometimes it's fun, and sometimes it's a little crazy, but it is the most exciting, kind of energetic environment in which I've ever worked, and I really enjoy that.
Jillian, you post probably more than any of the other, maybe not, but I feel like I see more of your posts. And you guys will be ending session at 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Talk a little bit about that. How do you stay awake? I mean, just a big cup of coffee in front of you? And
I do go to Starbucks quite a bit. I like the order ahead. It's interesting. Like, it truly is interesting. So most of the time I'm just really invested in what we're discussing. do have a great team, not only with this delegation, but with my colleagues on the committees. And so we'll be texting each other during it, because again, all the public hearings have been on Zoom, sharing information. We share who chairs at what time so that you can take a break. And I'll say that the Zoom, it's been a positive because we're getting so many more people who couldn't testify in the past. They couldn't make it to the Capitol, they couldn't sit for that many hours, so we're really getting some unique perspectives. Also, as a working mom, it gives me flexibility. So even though it might go till 3 or 4 in the morning, I'm home,
Right.
Which was different than when I was actually at the Capitol. So in many ways, it's just been a huge positive.
And it just provides so much more opportunity for members of the public, even here in West Hartford. We know we're 10 minutes from the Capitol, but so often there's so many barriers to getting there, be it transportation, childcare, job, to be able to testify. And now this is the second session we're seeing about how much more open and truly public our public hearing process can be by having these Zoom public hearings. And they may go long, but I feel like no matter what, this is what we should be doing. We should be making sure that government truly is accessible.
Yeah.
Do you
It's
foresee
especially,
it? I'm sorry.
well, I was going to just add, it's especially good for, like, on the aging committee, we're dealing with a lot of issues with seniors, of course, and it's much easier for seniors to testify, especially, if they're in congregate care settings, right, where they're not going to be able to get transportation to the Capitol, to Jillian's point, and then sit there for many hours. So it really does broaden, the number of voices that we hear, and that is inherently a good thing.
And I would build off that. Just the other day in the Public Health Committee, we've had a bill for 3 years to ensure that doctors' offices are fit for individuals who have special needs. Well, this year, many in the community had filmed testimonials, and we got to see their testimony. That had never happened because I don't think folks could make it to the Capitol building. And that really, we voted it out.
So Jillian, let's start diving into the issues. That's an interesting one and not one I'm too familiar with. So is this kind of an extension of ADA, or is this something different, what you're talking about, this particular issue?
There have been federal changes, but they were federal recommendations, and so what this would say is all hospital settings, it isn't every individual practice, but bigger hospital settings have to have at least the bed, the scale. There's a number of things that would have to be, would give individuals the ability to use the doctor's office. I mean, what we were hearing, it was so wild that many individuals aren't going to get their breast exams, because they just can't access the doctor.
Interesting.
And this is interesting because Derek and I heard about this at New Horizons. We would go out and have, which is in Farmington. And that was when we heard about this issue. And oftentimes, especially in emergency rooms, and not having the equipment and the training to deal with, to provide the level of care, to really move the person even.
So transfer them
from
a
a
wheelchair to a bed,
Yes.
or to an examining table, or...
Yes.
Yes, so I think it's very exciting that they were able to lend their voice through testimonials because we have Zoom. So I think Zoom has really created access that I hope it will continue in some form. I think it's important that people can come to the Capitol. I think it's also important that people can access us when they can't come to
Do
the
you guys have a
Capitol.
vote in that? Can you legislate that?
There's the rules, essentially, that we agree to, and we usually work on them, bipartisan fashion, agree and work on it with the legislative leaders. So, so the short answer is yes.
Okay.
We can formalize something, and I think that's going to happen, to Tammy's point, going forward. I mean, it's they say never waste a crisis, right? And that's something we can learn from and carry on with it.
So potentially I could have the option of coming to the Capitol and testifying, or testifying via Zoom.
Right. I think there's going to be some kind of hybrid approach going forward.
Okay. All right. So Derek, you said the magic word. I've got my notes here, and I wanted to talk to you about this. You brought this up at the mayor's house the other night. There was an event there, and you spoke at it.
Yep.
Talking about crossing the aisle. You really have taken charge, and really, I don't know, I talk about branding. You've really created a brand for yourself, and a big part of it is crossing the aisle. Talk a little bit about the importance of that, how it makes you feel, some of the things you mentioned the other night.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and I appreciate you saying that. And I think that's true of all of my colleagues, that we try to I mean, we don't try to, we do work across the aisle all the time. And it's a misperception, I think. The public hears more about the partisan fights, right, over the big bills. But the vast majority of the bills that we pass in committees are bipartisan. And we work together, and just because somebody has an R or a D, whatever, at the end of their name, doesn't mean that all of a sudden they don't have good ideas, right? And so I think you can learn from anybody, really, and as long as you approach it with a humility and an intellectual honesty. Now that doesn't mean at the end of the day you're always going to agree, but I think if people feel like they're at least listened to and respected, and not just, I would say, with colleagues in the General Assembly, but I think we all try to have that approach too with our constituents as well. So we get back every single email, every single phone call, and say, look, at the end of the day, right, sometimes you have to agree to disagree, but I think like that civility is what's missing in a lot of our politics, and we don't want to be Washington, and we're not. That's the hopeful thing. And I would say there's nothing that brings me legislative joy like being able to find that sweet spot where you work with other people and you get to a great bill and it gets passed. And sometimes it takes a couple years to do, but that's a great feeling.
It's about, I think a lot of it is building trust, being there even if you do disagree on a lot of the issues. So
Yep.
To that point, Jillian, let's talk a little bit. You are very public on social media, and you're very outspoken, which I love, about issues that are important to you. But I get frustrated personally because I think people take issues and they twist them in such a way, particularly for the purpose of raising money, to make them seem far more divisive. And I'm going to use a really crude one here, if you'll allow me. Jillian, you support a woman's right to choose her own health decisions. I think all of you do.
Yes.
And when couched that way, I think it makes common sense. You'll post something regarding that. I know there's some legislation pending right now that's going to fine-tune who is able to perform an abortion, for example. And you'll get some people with, what I look at as, I call them Fox talking points, and I'm not trying to get too divisive here, where they come at you and they talk about killing babies. And I couldn't think of a farther extreme between what you were trying to represent and support and what they're purporting you to represent. Talk a little bit about that. How do we diffuse that? Is there a way?
Well, so my background is that I worked for NARAL Pro-Choice Connecticut. I was the executive director and learned messaging training way back in the day. And what I learned and have taken with me is that you really break groups of people into three groups. And so there are folks that will never be with you. There are folks in the middle who can have a conversation, and by sharing information with one another, you might be able to move their position or they might move you. And then there's people who are always with you. And so individuals who are saying that type of rhetoric, they're not with me. We're never going to be on the same team. And so I would say what Derek said, politely agree to disagree. They're not being so polite with their language. But even when I get emails from just the few, because my district appears to be very pro-choice, I write back and try to have, I respectfully thank folks for reaching out, and I'm very honest, we disagree on this point. But yeah, when someone is using that type of language, I don't think we're going to find common ground.
And can you just decide not to engage? I mean, there are people who post things on weha.com, social media sites that I just don't argue with them because they accuse me of being on one side or the other side, or they just don't like something, and they're not very polite about it, and I just leave it alone.
About soon after I got elected, one of my tweets went viral, and that's when I had a lot of individuals from outside the state and across the state come onto my page. And so unfortunately, I have a policy where I don't respond to any comments. And it's been that way now for about 3 years.
Are you allowed, I think I know the answer to this question, you're not allowed to block or take people off who are
No.
across the line?
Personally,
Yes.
Facebook.
But not the state.
That's,
I
with some cousins,
like to think I have a little bit of a legal mind, but I don't understand that one.
Yeah.
So that one I'll never understand. So, so let's talk about when a new rep is elected, are you allowed to choose, or do people come and talk to you about what potential committee assignments? The goal is to get committee assignments, because that's where you learn about your areas of interest, and you get involved. Jillian, you chair at least one committee, right?
Vice chair.
Vice chair, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Okay, vice chair. So, Kate, let's start with you. What
Yeah.
committees, I know you're on child care, but talk about some of the committees you're on, and talk about some of your I'll call them pet projects, some of the things that are exciting to you legislatively going on.
I'm not on the Children's Committee, but I
Okay.
certainly believe we have to invest in
I'm sorry, I read the
childcare.
Tammy line here. I put your
But,
finance and education. I
but Tammy
apologize.
will cover
I read the wrong
everything
line.
mental
Yep.
health related.
Sorry,
But
Tammy.
I'm happy to lend my voice to anything childcare investment, because that's a critical thing.
Let's talk
But
about
I'm-
education.
I'm happy to talk about the committees. To your point, when we get elected, one of the things that you have to be able to articulate is what committees you might have interest in putting your time into, because as you heard, it's not just the lengthy public hearings that you're going through, but you really are crafting legislation in those committees that will go to the whole House or the whole Senate. And for me personally, the committees that I chose, were very directed by, what I was hearing from the district, and just really saw as priorities coming out of COVID. So for me, one of the committees I'm on is Finance, Revenue, and Bonding. Senator Slapp is also on that. And for me, in advocating for, how we need to kind of come out of this crisis and ensure that we do have a fairer tax system, that is one of the things that is critical. We just had a report that we heard last week from Department of Revenue Services that really does show that our low-income and middle-income families, are paying 3 to 4 times the effective tax rate of our wealthiest. And we can do something about that. And that's really one of the core reasons that I wanted to be on the Finance Committee. I'm also on higher education and employment advancement with Tammy and Derek. But for me there, a lot of the focus is, how do we ensure that we're building, greater workforce pipelines, especially for those who might not be pursuing college. So many of our routes to high wage and high growth jobs don't require a college degree. And there's a lot of things, especially in our own district with our manufacturers, that we can really take steps on for our students. And finally, I'm on the Insurance Committee, and for me, that's all about building, greater accessible and affordable health care. And I think, when we kind of have seen this crisis firsthand, there are so many disparities that have been laid in front of us, and a lot of those are in healthcare. So this session for me, it's a lot in working on those committees, but I'm also thrilled about a few bills that have come to me from some local residents. One around students, both here in West Hartford and around the state, who are really advocating for free menstrual products in our schools. And that's something that I'm thrilled to be really leading with them to make sure that we make that a reality.
All three of you are signed on as sponsors of that bill. I just wrote about it a couple of
Yes,
days ago.
those are very good,
right, yeah.
And what other prospects for passage of that bill?
I'm very hopeful, especially with Representative Gilchrest's assistance as Vice Chair of Public Health, and as you heard, the supporters of my colleagues here, because this bill has been attempted a few years previously. We expanded the scope to not just be schools, but public universities and our shelters. And we really see the groundswell, in hearing, especially from student voices that are saying, this is well past time. I should be able to access these products just like toilet paper or paper towels, and they're the lead that we're really following.
I think you always need, policy change and culture change, and this year it seems like the culture shift is bigger than it's ever been, and there is an understanding that these are necessary products.
Right, they're not luxuries, they're
Yes.
necessities.
Yeah.
One thing I might add with the committees is that when you have a delegation like this where we all are friends and we all talk to each other, we can strategize too to make sure that essentially that West Hartford is covered. In other words, Kate and I, we're on finance, right? And then we have Jillian, who's on appropriations, because, you want to have, right, the different money committees, that's what they call them, right, covered. And then judiciary, and Jillian's on judiciary. So we can kind of try to make sure that the residents of West Hartford know that their legislative delegation has the various committees, some representation on, which I think is important.
So Derek, this is a great chance to transition. With Agent, you've had some tremendous wins particularly with ageism in the workplace.
Right.
And
Right.
pay, that sort of thing. It didn't happen day one. It took you 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 years to shepherd these things through. Talk a little bit about not only the legislation, but the process and the tools you
Yeah.
use to try to shepherd that through.
Well, Jillian had a great point. I mean, so the first year, I introduced the pay equity bill, which was getting, and actually worked with Kate, and she was in a different role at the time, the executive director of 12. That was, Trump was just elected. There was a lot of momentum for, there were women's marches, et cetera. So I felt like we kind of had the wind at our back, and that helped a lot. However, and then Massachusetts passed a similar bill. So I went into it thinking, oh, this is going to be easy, right? Not the case. The bill got gutted in the House and basically imploded. And so when that happened, I was very disappointed. But the majority leader at the time, now the speaker, suggested, he said, he identified a Republican lawmaker who was great. She's since retired. And he says, you know what? He goes, work with her, and I bet you that's going to help. And because it's about relationships, it's not all of a sudden that there was some new data that, oh my gosh, wow, now, right, somebody's going to believe that the gender gap is a problem that didn't before. I mean, it's been in existence for many, many decades. But we spent the whole summer and fall, we had a bipartisan working group on the gender wage gap, and that worked. And then the next year, we were able to get it passed, and it was 124 to 4 in the House and 35 to 1 in the Senate.
Okay.
So,
That's
but
a
it's a win, but it took, it took time and it took relationship building.
Are the committees bipartisan?
Yes.
So you've got, on your committees that you two serve on, there are Republican members.
Every committee.
So that's
Yeah.
to me, that's terrific.
Not only that, I mean, we have what's called a screening process, and not to get into too much of the weeds for folks, but that's where we have the nonpartisan staff, and they're the lawyers. They help us, write the bills and research. And we have at higher ed, we screen the bills, which means we go over all the details and kind of some strategies to what do you think, and should we hold this, or, that kind of thing. We do that bipartisan. Not every committee does that, but we do that. And to your point earlier about trust, we sometimes we'll have to say, we're going to have to part ways on this issue, but we have them in, and because we do think that it makes for better legislation.
Jillian, you talked a minute ago about a cultural shift, and the wind is at your back or at our backs on some of these issues. Let's talk about, I called you a few months ago, I think it was in November, maybe we were having coffee, I don't remember if we talked on the phone or live, but we talked about aid and dying. I've got a mother-in-law who's unfortunately has a very low quality of life. She's not in pain, but she's a very low quality of life. And it had come up with my wife and I at some morning, and I called you. And at the time, you did not feel confident at all. You told me point blank, I really just don't think we've got the wind at our backs to make that happen. And yet, I'm seeing more and more of it on the news. I'm hearing particularly you and Derek talk about it a lot more. What's happening on that bill, and has there been a cultural shift?
So going into the session, I just didn't anticipate that the bill would get raised because it's the same makeup of the committee, of the legislature. It's a short session. But the chair of the committee, who I respect and am so close with, Jonathan Steinberg, he is really passionate about this policy.
What town does he represent?
He's down in Westport.
Westport.
And there was some tweaking that was made to make the bill stronger, and it was decided you can't wait on policies like these. And what we ended up seeing is an example of that hit home. A woman who testified last year just passed away in January, and so we failed her. Last year, during the public hearing, being new to the committee and my first time in a public hearing for aid and dying, I was hearing folks share that we had failed their family members, and it was painful to hear, but it didn't connect in the way that now it's wow, we didn't pass this and people are suffering. I think with this, the shift will really come when my colleagues and the public understand the actual policy. I think there's a lot of misinformation. So the policy is only for terminally ill individuals who have 6 months to live. They have to, I might get this wrong, but it's 2 consultations with the doctor, have to sign a form, they have to do it, no one can do it for them. So there's just a lot of protections in place so that individuals cannot be taken advantage of. And I think that's what's getting missed in some of the public discourse.
It's one of those issues that you get people coming out from all sides, and, you know, once money's involved, you know, we can stretch the truth apparently. And, but I give you credit, on a personal note, I lost a sister of mine 31 years ago now, and the last 8 weeks of her life were awful pain and suffering.
Yeah, I'm
It's just
sorry.
something you'd hate to see anybody go through, so that's,
Yeah, and the other big takeaway with a policy like this is you don't have to choose it.
right.
So right now, we're restricting someone's ability to choose this. And so if we pass this policy, we're giving someone a dignified way to end their life and not making anyone else make that choice.
Right.
And they need to be mentally sound, right?
Yes, that's another provision,
Yeah.
that if the doctor thinks that they're not, the doctor can recommend that they have to see someone.
What would you, I know that's a really tough question, what would you put the odds at it passing this session?
So it's a Senate bill. It got out of the Public Health Committee, so
Yep.
now it heads to the Senate.
Derek?
Well, this is going to sound like I'm punting, so to speak, but we haven't caucused the bill yet, so.
Walk through the caucus
Yeah, so I
process.
mean, in the Senate, because there's just fewer of us, we caucus every bill, which is, you know, a fancy term, I guess, for just, we talk about every bill.
Right, so you know where people stand.
Yeah, exactly, and at some point, the chair of the committee, he or she will be tasked with getting a vote count and saying, where are people? Do we have enough votes to pass it or not? So we haven't done that yet with this bill. We're going to start weekly caucuses, actually this week. So we'll start to do that. To Jillian's point, you know, it's a short session, which means you could actually count up the number of hours that we're going to be on the floor, and it's not as many as people think. You know, if you figure we're in, I'm just throwing this out there, maybe 20 days where we're actually on the Senate or on the House floor, and let's just say there's 5 hours each day, so that's 100 hours, right? And then you start to say, what are the bills that are going to take up a lot of time? This bill is a 10-hour bill, easy, in each chamber. Because everybody's going to get up. It's a very personal, right, issue. People are going to get up and they're going to talk about their experiences or their loved ones and et cetera, which is fine, but it's going to take a long time. And so that's where it comes in. But I hope, you know, to Jillian's point, and I really applaud her leadership on this issue. Yeah, I hope we get it done. People are suffering, and this is not forcing anyone to do anything.
Right.
It's just a choice.
It's also law, I believe, if I remember correctly, I think it's 16 other states, so this isn't exactly trailblazing
No.
national.
And we have data. I believe it's 25 years in Oregon.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of data to
Yeah.
show that it's not taken advantage of.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges today is people are too quick to disregard the data and look at either personal experiences or listening to maybe the wrong people who have typically a financial agenda, it seems like, so.
I want to clarify something. You mentioned being on the floor. I know there's a difference between the House and the Senate versus how much is happening in person, or has that changed?
I think it's pretty much the same now. I mean, so each committee can decide right now whether, well, the public hearings, I should say, they're joint committees, so they're House and Senate joint committees, and those are the public hearings have all been Zoom. And then the committee meetings, when they actually vote on the bills to pass them to the full General Assembly, that's up to each committee to decide how they want to do that. But then when we actually go into the building with the gold dome on top and everything, that's when it is in person for both the House and Senate.
Okay, wasn't for a while the Senate was still operating kind of in a more of a COVID mode, and
Well,
the House was more opened up?
I think the only difference is if you were to go to the Capitol now,
Yeah.
the advocates and lobbyists, there's a joke that, you know, you call the person an advocate if you agree with them and a lobbyist if you don't. But so I'll use either term. But so they are allowed, members of the public, on the second floor where the House operates, not on the third floor where the Senate. I don't actually agree with that. I think that they should be allowed on the third as well. I don't think it's a good look. I think it's, you turn on the State of the Union address and, people are there. And so I've expressed my views that I think we should open it up.
Is this a rules committee thing as well, where when the rules are set up in advance, like we talked about earlier? Is this the type of thing that's set up in rules, or is this a legislative thing?
No, I mean, it's neither in the rules or in legislation. It's one of those things that came up with COVID, and, you know, it's kind of, I don't know, fell through the cracks maybe is the best term, you know, but I can't wait till, you asked earlier, are you having fun? And there's some parts of it that are more fun than others, of course. Being with school groups, oh my gosh, the best, right? And having people, you know, talking to young kids about civics and how they can have their voice heard, et cetera, and having people at the Capitol and giving them a tour. I love that stuff. And so I can't wait for it to get back to how it was.
Time will tell. Tammy, let's come over to you. What committees are you serving on currently? I know you're childcare. I got the right line here. So, and talk about some of the big legislation you're involved with that has a good chance of passing this year.
So as Kate mentioned earlier, I'm on higher ed and employment advancement, in addition to, so I get to see the two of them quite a bit. And then I'm also in education and commerce. I'm a deputy majority leader, which really comes into play as we're looking at vote counting towards, you know, getting a sense of certain legislation in addition to screening the bills as it was mentioned earlier. And I was up for a short time on the Children's Committee. I'm no longer on the Children's Committee officially. But the work that I'm doing is around children's mental health that has been a focus of mine since November. So the speaker had a forum in which he invited lots of stakeholders from different hospitals, all the different commissioners, and different stakeholders within the legislature. And he asked this bipartisan kind of group to just talk about children's mental health issues, because it has been a tremendous focus of ours. We are having a crisis in the state of Connecticut, really throughout the United States. And at this time—
Is this due to COVID?
COVID has exacerbated a problem that was here.
Okay.
So we have had a lot of gaps within our care for children's mental health. And with COVID, it has been exposed. So we have children with really high rates of anxiety, depression. There's been an increase in suicide, you know, ideology. We've had a lot of kids not interested in attending school refusal. That has been a part of what they are experiencing. And, you know, a lot of kids have experienced loss. A lot of kids have experienced loss. And so a lot of times I know there's a conversation, well, things would be better if, you know, we wear a mask or we don't wear a mask. But that is a really small part of an issue.
Surface issue only?
It is a really superficial issue. The children were more impacted by the fact that they were staying at home when they had the uncertainty of not knowing when they would go back, when they have caregivers, a caregiver who has died or is very sick, and the stress of knowing what will happen next. And so all of these things have created what has become a children's mental health crisis. So at that forum that was convened in November, the speaker deputized me to help to lead this working group that is a bipartisan working group of about 7 of us that I am doing alongside with Representative Linehan, who is the chair of the Children's Committee, and also Representative Steinberg is a big part of this as well, over public health. And we started in November. I've talked to every stakeholder probably coming my way, parents, kids, you know, I mean, kids would tell me things like, you know, when we used to go to school, there were areas where you had a cozy couch, where if you just needed to chill out for a minute, you could have that place. You couldn't any longer with COVID restrictions in schools, like it's between spacing and the way you had to clean things. She was like, there's no place just to reset. Little things. So oftentimes we'll end up with the nurse, you know, and stay in the nurse's office saying, I don't feel well, because they need a moment to collect themselves. So it was really getting feedback from all different areas, and we've worked nonstop from that point until now. We have a 103-page bill that is a very comprehensive, not a Band-Aid solution, to how we can really address the overall impact and fix our system of care. And we address it looking at what the pediatrician's office looks like. That's the point of contact. Guess what? They are not trained to be mental health experts. So how do we connect them with the training they need and the support that they need? We're looking at the schools. Schools are the place that these kids are coming into if you can get them to go to school. Do we have enough providers and social workers? Teachers can't do all of this. We need experts here. So how do we push those in and provide grant funding for that? We're looking at school-based programs that may go in order to have training. If you need an urgent pop-up mental health clinic inside the school, how can we help them do that? But it's also a provider bill. This is a bill that looks at the fact that we do not have enough providers in Connecticut. So what do we do in the short term? We look at telehealth. We look at reciprocity. We look at licensure and doing some things to make it so that people can start to train to practice social workers day one while they're under a temporary licensure with a supervisor, but they're able to start doing care while they're preparing for their test and have a year to take that test versus 120 days. So we're looking at a soup to nuts way and also looking at what we can do around student loans. How can we get people to come here and stay here who are providers? And we're looking at oversight. So it's just...
Got one of those in your house, right?
Yeah.
Two.
Do you have two? So that's what we're working towards. So it is looking comprehensively at this problem, because one of the things that happened early on, you probably saw this, in the newspaper we kept reading about, oh, these kids are in the emergency room. They're in the emergency room and they're sitting up and lined up in the hallways. That is absolutely true. But what we know is emergency rooms are a place for stabilization. They can't provide psychiatric care. They can, and then they have to help coordinate and really have in place, how do we coordinate to get the care that kids need? And then we need all those places to be there. And that is a hard piece. I don't know if you saw in the current that came out yesterday, a really touching story about a mother whose child had has ADHD, who was sexually molested by a relative, and she has looked tirelessly for a connection, how to get care for this child. Denied, turned away because of insurance, because of access, because interestingly, if you have insurance, sometimes your insurance will not cover certain types of care. And fortunately, Husky does cover a lot of care, but we should not have that happening in the state of Connecticut. We shouldn't have that happening anywhere. So if this bill, you talk about bipartisan, we had so many people signing on to support this bill because it has touched everyone regardless of demographics, regardless of where you live, this color of your skin. This is a bill that has touched everyone, and we're really hoping and getting a lot of broad support for it.
It sounds like, I mean, I think we could do a show just on this bill, probably a 2-hour show, probably longer on this bill, 103 pages.
And I know I speak for all of us. We're very proud of Tammy and so grateful.
Can you tell how hard she's worked on it?
I wasn't going to cut her off.
Yeah. So anyone that's reached out to us, we can say, you know what, we'll connect with Tammy. You know, she's working so hard on it.
I think it's interesting because I attend, and at least 2 of you were former Board of Ed members in, here. I don't, Kate, you were not, right?
I was not, yeah.
It was
Tammy and Jillian were both former Board of Ed, and let's just say, the scenery has changed a little bit since you folks moved on, would be an understatement. It's interesting because I attend, Ronnie attends all the meetings, I attend most, or I watch what I miss on TV, and it's interesting because some of the people from, say, the other part of the Republicans will come up and they give what I talk about, Fox talking points, indoctrination, and really nonsense words where it's clear they just don't understand the issue. But so many of them come up and they really talk to exactly what you're saying here. And that's nice, it's refreshing to see that it is so bipartisan, because I can speak for those that I've seen, many of those that I've seen speak at the Board of Ed meetings, and they talk about the same issues. And maybe they top-line it a little bit more because they're not as involved as you, but it's nice to see something. I love bipartisan, Joe. I feel the same way, Derek, as you do. I love to see when people can come together on an issue.
Some of the best ideas, there was, but really good ideas come when you have those bipartisan discussions. And one, for example, was something called forced diagnosis, where you often have to have a diagnosis to get this kind of care. And the stigma around that, because there's still so much stigma around mental health, people will not necessarily seek care. But then if you think about it like almost like an employee assistance program model, where you just might need a moment where you're going through a stressful period or an anxious period, but doesn't mean you have anxiety. And that came from one of our Republican colleagues who said, can we have a way that people can seek care, but we don't force them to have a diagnosis? And I think that's a wonderful idea. And it came from her. Her background is in insurance. She's been doing it for 20 years. It was a great recommendation. So I think it's really important to lean in, to listen, to be willing to be collaborative, and not just see someone's party affiliation and automatically cut them off. We won't get anywhere that way. And we have been bipartisan in this process from the very beginning. And it's been such a wonderful opportunity for me. It really has.
So how do the prospects look for this bill?
This bill, the prospects look really good. It helps that it's the Speaker's top priority. It's 5001, so that is very helpful. But it's helpful when you go around and have conversations with people and members are sharing, oh gosh, it's my child too. It's my child. The conversations in the building, bipartisan conversations that people are telling me on the side, there is a lot of support for this. And it's not a perfect bill, but the people, as they've told us, as they testified, that it will absolutely transform care if we can pass anything close to it. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that it has a whole lot of co-sponsors is all I know. And there's some people on there, I was like, wow, I never expected that, for real.
I love what you're saying, and I love the way you're saying it, because I think one of the biggest misconceptions about elected officials is they're not humans. They were put up to it by some dark organization, and some whatever deep state. And that's one of the reasons why I asked you, are you having fun and do you love your jobs? Because I think it humanizes you guys, and I think that's important. I think you guys are pretty good at that department anyway. But hopefully, there's some people watching who are skeptical of the process, who are saying, "Wow, these are just like I have the same issues at home. I've got the same thoughts at home." And that's what
to me, it's like every day you get to learn something new.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a job where I get to meet new people, and they're going to teach me all about new issues, and then we get to strategize to try and fix problems.
Right.
It's a dream job.
That's right.
It's almost, my dad was a minister, so I'm inspired by him saying it's almost like calling, because it's beyond a job, it's kind of a way of life. And for some people, it would be too much. And I'll just give you an example. So my daughter was in the pit orchestra for Footloose, which Conard High is doing.
Great show.
It's a great show. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
And so I was sitting, getting ready to watch Footloose, and the woman who was sitting next to me, her and her husband, leaned over. I'm really sorry to bother you, but can we talk about Brainerd Airport? And she didn't want Brainerd Airport to be closed, et cetera. So we had a conversation, and I didn't mind. She was very respectful. It was great, but it's just, if you're in the community and you're listening and you're approachable, those things happen a lot. And I enjoy them, and I think probably all my colleagues do as well.
And I think, if anything, you've heard a little bit about how odd some of our experiences certainly were as being new elected officials during COVID, but I think we've all learned through COVID just how important government is,
Yes.
right? And I think that was one of the things I came upon so often in talking with people about, is how this is a moment where we can rebuild trust in our government. And, I was thinking of a woman who came up to me just yesterday at an event too, and she just reiterated how proud she was of our state and what we have done through COVID, to follow the science, to follow public health, and to be where we are. And I think that's what, kind of joins us too, and really just believing in kind of really the true power of what our government can do for our people.
So perfectly, boy, I couldn't have. I got to give you the $20 after the show. Lead into my next question here. So we had the governor on probably about a year ago. We spoke about the state of the state, but I definitely have that on the list. I want to talk to you guys. Connecticut is seeing record population. I don't want to use the wrong terms. I don't want to say population growth, but they're seeing record people moving into the state. They're seeing record housing. They're seeing practically no housing stock. one of the vice presidents of the Connecticut Realtors Association we consult with very often prior to shows, and as of a week ago, 23 houses were on the market in all of West Hartford out of whatever it is, 29,000 units or whatever it is, that were under contract. Talk a little bit about the state of the state. Maybe Derek, I'll start with you. Fiscally, there's a lot of talk from the governor's office about a surplus. Our rainy day fund is in great shape.
Yeah.
We're doing better on funding long-term liabilities. Can you talk, I know you're not in the governor's office, but tell us a little bit about, from your view.
Yeah, I think we're happy to share some credit with the governor on the fiscal health of Connecticut. We're not lurching from one budget crisis to the next, which is something that he said was important to end, and we, certainly feel that. You talked about, some of the numbers and the data, and it's fantastic. I mean, it's much better than it was. I think that we still need to be conservative in the sense that we have a lot of one-time money coming from Washington that is not going to be here forever. We're not going to get that in the next biennium. We have billions and billions and billions of, we all know this, of unfunded liabilities, because way before any of us got in the legislature, the legislature and whoever was governor, did not pay the bills, right, for 70 years, and we're all on cleanup duty. So I just think we need to say, this is good, and let's keep it going, but let's just be smart about it. In other words, no election year gimmicks of things that are not fiscally prudent. And then to your point, just about how the growth and people moving is great, but it also has some hiccups along the way, like affordable housing,
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure and the mental health, and there's needs that we need to invest in. So we have to just find that balance.
So there has been talk of a tax cut, and they've been vague, whether it was, I don't know, people are saying gasoline taxes, or talks of a tax cut. I personally agree with you. My research tells me we have a lot of unfunded liabilities, even though we're doing well now. Is there going to be a tax cut, or
Yes.
Okay, there is.
Yes.
Where's it going to be?
Well, that's the $400 million question. That's about how much we'll probably see. Right. We don't know yet, right? There's a lot of great ideas coming out of the Finance Committee. There's a lot of, there's some targeted tax cuts in terms of like higher ed. We're talking about incentivizing, student loan debt tax cuts for businesses that, hire people in the healthcare industry, those type of things. So I think there'll be some targeted. I do think there'll be something on the property tax side. I actually like the governor's proposal on the car tax, by the way, on capping it at a certain point, which, by the way, would lower the car tax for everybody in West Hartford, because our mill rate's about 40, and his proposal was, I think, 30, maybe?
29,
29, I think yes, we just don't know exactly how it's going to shake out yet.
I think the key thing, to Derek's point, is, this isn't an instance in which we should just kind of throw in one-time, tax cuts that just feel good, right? If we do anything, these should be cuts that really kind of get at some of the inequities that have been in our tax system. So I think, even when you see what might happen more immediately around kind of this increase in our gas prices, that might be something we address short term, but hopefully out of this budget, we will have proposals that really get at, again, not just our long-term fiscal future, but again, a lot of those inequities that are built into the tax system.
And that's what I think about is, certainly on the surface, tax cuts sound great, but then I think about, unfunded liabilities, things like that. It's, proceed with caution.
What I think the number is every billion that we put towards unfunded liabilities, and we put in an extra about $1.5 billion last time, so we're bending that curve, frees up a couple $100 million.
About $300 million.
Right, in the general operating budget that we can use to invest in education or invest in the bill that Tammy is shepherding through with mental health, right? You name it. I mean, that kind of thing.
So we are up against it. I want to bring up a piece of legislation that I would like to see pass. I did tell Tammy this morning, she laughed but agreed with me. The only item in the United States that you can buy for a fraction of a cent is gasoline. And it makes no sense. There's no such thing as a tenth of a penny. I pull into the gas station, I pay $4.29.9 per gallon. I would like, my request for all of you is I would like to see that change where they're not allowed to charge fractions of a pennies or a denomination that does not exist. I'm going to bring it up on our next interview with the governor. I would like to see it rounded to the nearest penny. It's always bothered me.
That's not just in Connecticut.
No, it's federally.
I know.
No, it's
So
federally.
why is that?
I'll tell you why.
Could be above our pay grade, John, really.
Well, I think we can legislate anything.
So we'll take on OPEC for you.
It's actually not OPEC, it's actually a U.S. thing. But basically, what happened when gasoline was 24 cents a gallon, and they could put 24.9 cents per gallon, it represented almost a 4% hidden cost to gasoline. So at 24 cents a gallon, it made sense for the oil companies because it really impacted their bottom
Sure.
line. At $2.80 or $4.20 a gallon, it makes no sense.
Well, so how the process works
Yeah.
is it's too late at this point.
I know. Next year.
Next year, we
Call you in November.
can introduce individual rules. Like over
We
committee.
talked Dave and Donnie this past November, we're going to talk gas costs, beef
I
fights,
just wanted to round down, not up.
I
That's
thought
the
it
thing,
started in
right?
Connecticut and then spread nationally,
We
right?
could be, you, the four of you could be leaders again. Not that you don't lead enough, but you could lead again. So, any last questions? We're right up against it here, but
No, I think I'm good.
anything you want to say, parting shots to our listening and viewing audience?
I just want to say, this is the shortest, isn't this the shortest session of the short sessions?
It is.
It's 84 days.
Yeah.
I think someone told me today we have 51.
Why is it so
Someone was
short?
counting. So I don't
know why we started on the Wednesday we started on.
Right.
But that did it.
That
We
did it.
started kind of like the second Wednesday instead of the
Yeah.
first Wednesday.
Yeah.
I would say, and I think we're here for you, so if you have questions or concerns or issues, you can contact us. That's what a state representative or a state senator is, and we can help navigate systems for you.
Just type in your names to Google and you can see all of your email addresses.
That's right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
honestly, you don't have to know the bill number or if you support or don't support, a certain issue we're talking about. Anything you care about, just feel free to get in touch with us, and we're really there to navigate it from there.
And treat them with respect. They really are. You got to go bang on doors. It's so hard to get elected. You get abused. Treat these folks with respect because they work really hard for you and they make the state a better place.
And you,
to live.
both of you, I just want to say, I think I'm sure we're all in agreement on this. Thank you for what
Oh
you
my
do.
gosh,
Local
absolutely.
journalism is really hurting now. We know the newspapers and the TV, journalists are getting laid off. And so the community journalism that both of you do is such an important service to this town. So thank you.
Thank you.
We wouldn't do anything without you, basically.
No.
We would not
So this is one of the-
links.
Thank you.
we're definitely, let's get through the conventions, which are in May, which I'm sure you're aware of that. And then we're going to get you guys back on because there's just so much to talk about. I mean, I can go another hour, but we're up against it. So Kate, Tammy, Jillian, and Derek, thank you so much. For Ronnie Newton, I'm John Lyons, WeHow.com, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.